Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we're going to dive into what exactly the Carnictis Sordicus are. Within the vast, chilling, and often unexplored catalog of cinematic creatures, few have managed to provoke such a visceral, primal fascination as the Carnictis. These subterranean aberrations, part worm, part nightmare, were seared into the minds of viewers thanks to their appearance in the unforgettable 2005 adaptation of King Kong, directed by Peter Jackson. More than mere monsters, they are an organic manifestation of primal horror lurking in the darkest, most forgotten corners of the earth, or in this case, Skull Island. In this video, we're going to descend, quite literally, into the depths of that brutal and fascinating ecosystem to fully explore one of the most disturbing and iconic entities in the Kong universe. Grotesque-looking creatures, parasitic in nature, and with an origin as ancient as the dinosaurs themselves. Beings that, with just a few minutes on screen, manage to disturb, impress, and captivate an entire audience. The Carnictis are not only a physical threat within the story, but also a conceptual one. They serve as a reminder that in places where evolution runs unchecked, things can be born that were never meant to exist. Everything we know about them isn't limited to what we saw on the big screen. The mythology surrounding them is carefully constructed in a key document for the most devoted followers of the saga's lore, the natural history of Skull Island. This book, more than a guide, a treatise on fantastic biology, maps out, with fictional rigor and boundless creativity, the hidden ecosystem of the island, its food chains, its alien flora, and of course, its most sinister predators. Within its pages, the Carnictis Sordicus are not just listed as a rarity. They're presented as an extreme example of adaptation, survival, and wild Darwinian mutation. Known for their brutal scene in the movie, these monstrous worms are at the center of one of the most visceral and disturbing moments in contemporary adventure cinema. The death of Lumpy, the Venture's cook, a sequence that remains etched in the collective memory for its rawness, desperation, and emotional weight. In a matter of seconds, calm turns to chaos when the team falls into a pit infested with these creatures. Jimmy, Choi, Hayes, and other characters find themselves on the brink of an unprecedented massacre, and the Carnictis, with no mercy or apparent logic, emerge as the wildest face of the ecosystem. But what exactly are the Carnictis? According to the pseudoscientific records found in the film's companion novels, we're talking about gigantic invertebrate organisms. They can reach between 2 and 3 meters in length, though some theories suggest that even larger specimens exist in the island's deeper regions. Their physiology points to a brutal evolutionary process. It's believed they are distant descendants of intestinal parasites that, during the Mesozoic era, lived inside colossal creatures like the Vastidosaurus rex. They were primitive symbionts, almost invisible inhabitants of the digestive systems of these beasts, feeding on waste and organic matter. However, a catastrophe marked a turning point. One of these dinosaurs died, trapped deep within a volcanic canyon, dragging its internal hosts down with it. Isolated, starving, and unable to return to a host body, the parasites were forced into radical evolution. What happened next is a perfect example of how necessity can shape the impossible. Instead of dying, they adapted. They learned to survive outside, in the hostile environment of the abyss. And not only did they survive, they mutated. The thermal and chemical conditions of the area, rich in minerals, vapors, and constant humidity, acted as a catalyst for their transformation. Over centuries, their biology changed entirely. Their skin hardened, forming a shiny black shell that makes them nearly invisible in the muddy gloom. Their mouths expanded, developing multiple rows of chitinous teeth, and their predatory instinct became refined, lethal, surgical. They were no longer symbionts. They were hunters. In the film, we see them attack with animal precision. Lumpy, in a desperate attempt to save Choi. Fights bravely armed only with a machete. He manages to take down a few. Yes, but the horde is too much. The camera doesn't look away, and Peter Jackson spares no detail in showing the character's gruesome fate. It's a scene hard to forget, both for its brutality and its slow-burning tension. And that's where the Carnictis cement their place as one of the most terrifying monsters in modern cinema. The official novelization of the film expands this sequence, adding layers of drama and action. We see Jack barely fend off one of these worms. Hayes, trapped, screams as his legs are crushed by the jaws of a creature seemingly pulled from a nightmare. Carl Denham, usually a man obsessed with his camera, briefly becomes an improvised Avenger, wielding a weapon to clear a path for his companions. Ultimately, it's the arrival of the rest of the crew and a barrage of gunfire that contains the threat. And yet after that scene, the Carnictis vanish completely from the story. Their end is never confirmed, but it's presumed that with the eventual geological collapse of Skull Island, many of these species were buried or wiped out. There's no evidence of their survival, though the echoes of their presence still resonate among fans, who consider them a pure symbol of biological horror. Curiously, these creatures also make an appearance in more toned-down versions of the Kong canon, such as the children's book Kong, King of Skull Island, Young Reader Edition. In that context, the Carnictis are reimagined as mysterious but non-lethal forms, adapted for a younger audience, a shadow of their true form, a whisper of what they really represent. In this installment on the channel, we'll peel back every layer that makes up the Carnictis, from their visual design and paleobiological references to their symbolism within the adventure and horror film genres. We'll analyze their behavior, possible weaknesses, narrative function, and why, with just a few minutes of screen time, they managed to become one of the most powerful examples of Lovecraftian horror ever embedded in a Hollywood blockbuster. These worm-shaped monstrosities, born from the darkest corner of evolution, are exclusive inhabitants of the most extreme and lethal environments on Skull Island, areas marked by a suffocating combination of perpetual humidity, high temperatures, muddy ground, and a constant stench of organic decay. In these places where life and death intertwine without respite, the Carnictis move with eerie stealth, sliding beneath the surface like living shadows. Covered by a thick, chitinous armor, black as basalt and shiny as crude oil, these beings find in their natural shell not only protection from physical attacks, but also an effective camouflage system. Among mud, rotting roots, and wet rocks, their bodies blend into the landscape, becoming nearly indistinguishable until it's too late. This shell, reminiscent of a biological nightmare, grants them an undeniable evolutionary advantage, the invisibility of the patient predator. But it's beneath that sinister casing where their true repulsiveness lies. When torn away in sections, either through combat or accident, it reveals a living mass, fibrous and viscously pink, with a texture that seems to fall somewhere between raw flesh and rotting tissue. This inner skin, moist and pulsating, is not only offensive to the eye, it betrays the very essence of their infectious nature, as if each one of these creatures were a primordial disease, given form and movement. The Carnictis do not hunt for sport. They have no intelligence, no language, not even eyes to perceive the world. They only have hunger, an endless appetite that drives them to emerge from their cavernous hiding places whenever they detect a source of food. And when they do, hell is unleashed. Instead of a traditional face, their heads end in a circular opening whose geometry resembles a meat trap. This orifice does more than serve as a mouth. It is a deadly capture organ, lined with a ring of razor-sharp fangs capable of tearing flesh, piercing bone, and gripping any unfortunate creature firmly. But that's not the worst part. Inside this structure lies a second retractable jaw, highly specialized, which shoots out like a harpoon, firing with surgical violence to latch onto its prey and drag it into the inner maw. A biological design worthy of a biomechanical nightmare. According to the fictional treatise The Natural History of Skull Island, the most exhaustive compendium on the aberrant biodiversity of this cursed place, few creatures rival the visceral horror provoked by the Carnictis. Described as digestive anomalies, they slither with a serpentine, broken, and unpredictable motion, as if something inside them were poorly assembled. At first glance, they seem clumsy, but this perception is dangerously misleading. Their slowness is only a disguise, a veil behind which they hide their relentless attack capability. Though their diet is largely scavenger-based, Carnictis do not hesitate to pounce on injured, sleeping, or cornered animals. They are extreme opportunists. Their predatory behavior is instinctive, almost automatic. They detect a vibration. They emerge. They capture. They devour. That simple. That lethal. They've been described as walking stomachs, and it's no exaggeration. Their entire anatomy appears built with a single purpose: to digest. Everything about them, from their method of movement, to their attack strategy, to their physical endurance, revolves around that primary function. In essence, they are like mouths with legs, a digestive sac with a will of its own. And what's most impressive is their size. Some specimens can reach over 3 meters in length and nearly half a meter in diameter, making them dominant predators within the island's deepest and most humid zones. It is known that they have even devoured medium-sized predators like the Venetosaurus, a considerable feat given the ferocity of those reptiles. However, against titans such as the Vastidosaurus rex or Kong himself, they pose no direct threat. Their kingdom is not the surface. It is the underground, the caverns, the hidden abysses where sunlight never reaches. It is precisely in that climatic isolation where one of their most marked weaknesses is found: cold. Low temperatures slow down their vital functions, leading to total paralysis and eventually death. Higher elevations on the island or areas where water flows at sub-zero temperatures are lethal to them. That's why their range of action is limited to warm and humid zones, where they can move, hunt, and reproduce freely. But even the most terrifying monster has an evolutionary contingency plan. In this case, it's reproduction. Carnictis eggs have an extraordinary capacity to withstand extreme conditions. They can remain dormant underground for years, even decades, in a state of biological hibernation. When the climate becomes favorable, the hatchlings emerge rapidly, with voracity and an insatiable hunger to populate the ecosystem with increasingly efficient copies. And if that weren't terrifying enough, there's an even more grotesque symbiosis at play: their relationship with the arachnopincers. These monstrous spiders, whose life cycle depends on very specific conditions, have developed an unusual reproductive method. In some cases, their eggs are ingested by the Carnictis. Inside the digestive system of these worms, the embryos are not destroyed. On the contrary, they incubate. They grow. They slowly feed on the host's internal fluids and finally emerge through the Carnictis's rectal tract. An absolutely disturbing scene which, although not shown in the film, is detailed with chilling precision in the texts of the expanded universe. Incredibly, the Carnictis does not die in the process. Its body serves as a living, disposable womb. As for their senses, although completely blind, they have developed a vibrational sensory system, so precise they can detect the movement of prey several meters away, even if it's walking in silence. This biological radar makes silence the only viable defense for surviving in their domain. Their physical strength is colossal. When they capture a victim, their segmented muscles exert such intense pressure that bone crushing is almost automatic. Escaping once caught in their jaws is virtually impossible. Only an extremely violent action, a deep wound, an explosion, a decapitation, can offer a chance at survival. The design of the Carnictis for Peter Jackson's film adaptation was no accident. It was inspired by real species such as Socia, creatures from the Cambrian period, and modern worms like bloodworms, which possess an extendable proboscis with teeth. This scientific foundation was combined with a macabre, almost alien visual design that gave them the air of a Lovecraftian creature born from a godforsaken ecosystem. Thanks to this masterful fusion of science fiction and horror, the Carnictis Sordicus solidified themselves as one of the most memorable, repulsive, and fascinating monsters in the history of contemporary cinema. Although their screen time was brief, their impact has endured. Today, every time a fan revisits the pit scene or opens a copy of the natural history of Skull Island, the image of these infernal worms resurfaces, and with it, an eternal warning. Sometimes, the deepest terror doesn't need eyes to find you.